Welcome and thanks for joining us. My guest today is Robert Williams, Vice President for Product Go-to-Market for Emerging Network Security Solutions at Palo Alto Networks. Hey Robert, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
Absolutely. And so, we're here to talk today a little bit about IoT security, 5G adoption. A study last year across kind of agencies found 89% of federal agencies have plans to adopt 5G technology. 44% are already piloting or deploying 5G, but then 87% have concerns about cybersecurity risks with this increased network technology. I mean, what's the latest that you're seeing on, that adoption aspect, but also the security aspect of these technologies?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been a really interesting transformation from 3G to 4G to 5G. This is not a brand new thing. This has been an evolution, frankly. So we've seen it go from things like traditional mobile devices in our hands, either smartphones or tablets, to now things that are connected to either make us more efficient, being able to communicate with citizens better and constituents, improve public safety. So what's really interesting is that it's across a lot of different use cases. Right. We're seeing it from a critical infrastructure standpoint, so being able to help agriculture and interior and energy be able to have better visibility of what's happening out there in the fields and be able to be more efficient with what they're doing. As I mentioned, public safety and defense, so things like AR and VR and helping training for our military teams, public safety in cities, and then also several things in the public federal health space, which I'll talk a little bit more about, but VA hospitals, telehealth, things like that. So many interesting use cases that we continue to see.
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of benefits, I'm sure, to just more interconnected technologies, especially in those high priority, public mission spaces, whether it's healthcare or emergency services, so on and so forth. But, there are also threats, of course, to digital infrastructure, to cybersecurity threats. How are those evolving? What's the latest on the threat front?
Yeah, the threats have absolutely evolved just like the technology. So the bad actors have seen the new transformation of technology, and they're finding new vulnerable points, as we kind of call them, the weakest links. And one of the things about this technology is that a lot of the data is unencrypted at this point. These are devices that you can purchase in a variety of different places, and so it creates the ability for bad actors to also get their hands on them and find ways to get into the supply chain and find the ability to get into the code. The other things are just the human elements as well. So we have devices, they all have an operating system on them. Have those operating systems been updated recently? Have they been patched? And so it creates a lot of vulnerabilities to get into the networks. And unfortunately, we've seen a massive increase of not only cyber attacks, but things between ransomware, which impact our businesses, and then also the downtime that impacts things like in the healthcare space, which is truly life and death situations.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I think we saw a reported cyber attack on a Florida hospital in early February. Yeah. And it took more than a week for that hospital system to return to its normal operations, so kind of a real world impact there. What are some of the challenges in the healthcare sector specifically?
Yeah, healthcare in general, it's been great with the amount of transformation that they've had, so improving the experience for patients from the moment you walk in there into a VA hospital or your local clinic to being able to have more electronic data records and connected hospital floors. Of course, telehealth, seen some great things in the Air Force as an example, but what's happening is that the bad actors are getting, I would call it access to the medical devices. That's one of the biggest things. So medical devices are now more connected to the internet. And so with that, it allows them to, if they get control of it, take advantage of those devices and then take the data, instead of sending it back to the public cloud or the private cloud where the agency has planned for it to go, they can send it to different servers. They can lock it down. The nation states can get access to our very critical healthcare records. And in the case of that Florida hospital that you mentioned, they actually locked down all of the records for both scheduling and legacy patient data. So that made the hospital not be able to even see patients for nearly a week. We actually saw, it was outside of the US, but in Germany, a hospital was shut down for an entire week. They had to send people nearly an hour away from that hospital. Unfortunately, multiple patients died during that time period. So truly life and death situations. The bad actors in this case do not have a conscience, and they're either locking down our data, they're shutting down operations, and in some cases severely impacting the business.
What are some of the solutions to that problem? Is it on the front end when you're buying technology and setting requirements? Is it more about how you're operating and monitoring it, or is it a blend? What are some of the solutions, the best practices?
Yeah, there's many, and we're seeing some really good best practices coming out of federal civilian, federal health especially, and several others in university hospitals and things like that. And first and foremost is that on the IT and the line of business side, so the chief medical officers, the biomed clinician teams, they have got to work together from a technology perspective. So a lot of the new technology innovations like the medical devices may not start in the technology group. So they've got to share their ideas, they've got to talk about their 3 to 5 year vision of the outcomes this technology is going to drive, and honestly have a plan and say, if this attack were to happen, what would we do? How would we mitigate it? How would we reduce the attack surface? And so first and foremost, working together. And then after that, identifying the crown jewels of data. So you have to know all the data that's coming in and out of these devices, where it's going, and being able to say, this is what we could, and I hate to say this, live with in terms of what devices and data could get access, and then what is absolutely not being able to be accessed outside of our group.
Yeah, that makes sense. You got to really prioritize things,
Absolutely.
I'm sure. I think you're seeing federal agencies face some of those decisions under initiatives like the Federal Zero Trust Strategy, which requires them to encrypt data, get a better handle on their attack surface, as we're seeing it called, in terms of the devices they have out there. It's just getting more complex, though, right, for agencies to manage a lot of this technology, and they're not going to get a lot of money to hire more people to manage more technology. So, how can you do this smartly while still doing it securely?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of great technology that is coming out that leverages more machine learning, more artificial intelligence. So once you have visibility into these devices, these users, these applications, all the things that align to the Zero Trust strategy, but being able to take behavioral analytics around it. So knowing what is acceptable behavior, what is the anticipated behavior of these devices, so that any anomalies you see, first it's notifying you of that, it's setting a risk level, this is a low, medium, high, again, based back to those crown jewels, being able to stop threats in line. So some of our larger agencies have very extensive staffs, others do not, that are smaller. So being able to stop threats in the event that you don't have humans or people that can stop the threats for you, and then making recommendations on policies to improve the posture long term. So there's a lot of technology out there that can automate a lot of this, make a lot of recommendations so that our very high valued people can focus on more strategic initiatives.
What are some of the steps that agencies can take to really, take advantage of artificial intelligence, machine learning, automation in the cybersecurity process? You mentioned some of them, like identifying unusual, anomalous behaviors in a device. But in terms of just setting kind of the groundwork for taking advantage of something like this, where are you seeing agencies at right now, and how do they get prepared to actually take advantage of it? Yeah,
absolutely. So many agencies already leverage firewall services, which is a great starting point. So what a traditional firewall does is it looks at all the data and traffic in line. Some of the more advanced firewall services can also look at new types of devices. So in the case of healthcare, medical devices, or in the case of critical infrastructure, what we call OT devices, operational technology devices. Having firewall services that have advanced kind of cloud services, which then send some of the data, just metadata, back to be able to correlate it and see what type of incidences that they're finding. It's a pretty logical extension to that baseline network security that they have. And then deciding how much you want to have the artificial intelligence either take over action for you or just make recommendations that then you take the action on.
Got it. And then, we talked about how agencies don't have a lot of money to hire new staff, but in terms of training staff, how well prepared are you seeing agencies? What can they do in the realm of training just to really operate these new technologies, or these new paradigms of using technology in a smart way?
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely seeing some progress with the agencies focusing on the training side, which is great. I know that at Palo Alto Networks and several of our ecosystems, community, we really focus on providing ongoing training to the community, the new types of threats that we see, publishing reports. So we don't hold back the information. We share it as soon as we see it, and we talk about the types of threats, and then we also share it with them through their platforms. So whether it's firewall, whether it's cloud security and security operation services, we share them in line saying, these are the type of threats we're seeing, here's how you should mitigate it now, and here's how you prepare for it in the future.
Got it. And you alluded to it earlier on, but I wanted to ask about supply chain security.
Sure.
I mean, you ask 10 people what supply chain security is these days, you'll get 10 different answers.
Yeah.
But within kind of the context of this conversation, how are you seeing that applied smartly by agencies across their different organizations that are responsible for supply chains?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with maybe the critical infrastructure supply chain side of things, and it's everything from the operational devices and operational technology that's in the environments, whether it be agriculture environments or interior or energy or the military side. It's everything from the physical assets, so things you may get from a Rockwell Siemens, devices that are going to be making their operation side more efficient. And then there's the technology supply chain, so things from applications and cloud. So being able to have end-to-end visibility of that, and back to the zero trust posture, being able to have a risk assessment of it, being able to stop the attacks. So from a federal perspective, we're seeing some really good work. I think there's an opportunity to share even more best practices with businesses that are in critical infrastructure, because we're seeing some unfortunate significant attacks when it comes to things like in the utility and energy space, when it comes to manufacturers of food and even on the water supply and things of that sort in the municipal levels.
Yeah, I mean, I think that agencies sometimes struggle to really monitor their different sectors. Different agencies are responsible for different sectors of critical infrastructure, whether it's water or healthcare. I don't know, do you have any observations on how that could improve going forward? I think this is an issue that GIO and others have flagged consistently for the last decade, really. Yeah,
absolutely. So cross-agency sharing of information, best practices. I like to think that us in industry can be a great meeting in the middle point. There's actually a group in the White House, the National Cyber Team, that focuses on ecosystems and kind of bringing us together not only in the industry side, but also agencies to have joint labs as an example and say, here's what we're doing individually, here's some new technology that's either coming from industry or one agency sponsored it, here's how you can leverage it in your agencies, and then we as the industry side can share more of these best practices and provide abilities to test this and pilot this before they do wide-scale deployments.
That's interesting. I haven't heard of the joint labs before. Is that something that has been set up between agencies and industry at this point? Or
it's something that we've seen out of the White House National Cyber Team, and then also on the industry side, Palo Alto Networks has multiple, and then we also work with large federal system integrators and other global system integrators that we work closely with, that they may provide staff augmentation and risk assessment and advisory services. We provide the technology, and we work together very early days so that when these are deployments that we want to see 1 to 2, 3 years from now, we're already providing agencies with the ability to test that technology now.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so, I mean, this brings us to kind of the conversation about public-private partnerships. You refer to it as an ecosystem. I think CISA Director Jen Easterly sometimes calls it operational collaboration, where they want to advance beyond the sort of staid model of public-private partnerships that sometimes people think of. But beyond what you've already described, what kind of partnerships, collaborations do you think we need to continue to see across the public and private sectors to really drive security forward?
Sure. I think the critical infrastructure space is really interesting because a lot of the companies that fall into the industries of critical infrastructure are for-profit or B2B companies. So we've got to see them absolutely take advantage of not only the guidance and even the regulation, frankly, but also the best practices that are coming from the agencies and from us. And so an example is in the 5G space, there's a lot of guidance that we've provided, and it's not just in the cybersecurity space, it's with the telecom network operators that are operating the networks that then power the 5G devices. Working with the cloud service providers like your AWS's and Microsoft and Google's of the world, where they're saying these are the type of applications you're going to run on the devices, here's some best practices, and being able to make those services available in GovCloud, in FedRAMP High, and hopefully that the companies that are leveraging this technology, they see that if it's met the government requirements, if it's gone through that scrutiny, if the ecosystem of technology service providers and telecom operators and cyber companies are working together, that hopefully I can trust that level of ecosystem partnership and those technologies in my environment. And the more we do that, I think the less attacks we'll see.
Got it. Yeah, it's talking kind of about secure by design, which is again what CISA talks about a lot. And we're expecting we're going to have a new national cyber strategy come out here this year. I'm wondering, what are you watching in 2023 that you think is going to be particularly impactful on the cybersecurity critical infrastructure front?
Yeah, absolutely. So critical infrastructure in the case of manufacturing is one. So President Biden talked about it in the recent State of the Union, over $200 billion, $300 billion of investment in manufacturing coming over the next 2 years. So what are we doing? Because we know a lot of that investment is going to come in technology. So can we provide guidance, and can we provide relatively straightforward regulatory compliance to help them understand what's needed and being able to provide technology and tools that interoperate well? I think the other thing is being able, to the point of interoperability, making sure that they, as these companies in critical infrastructure, get a 360 view of their environment. So beyond just the cyber side, but the cloud side, the quantum computing side, a lot of new technology, is giving them an end-to-end view of everything that's happening in their environment. And being able to make informed decisions of, yes, I want to be on the bleeding edge of new technology, or yes, I want to take advantage of some of these grants that are happening, but I know that I'm going to build cybersecurity in first into those plans.
Yeah, I mean, and reaching out to the critical infrastructure community, it's pretty varied community, big companies, small companies, small utilities, larger utilities. One of my favorite stories that I've heard recently is that a defense contractor, small defense contractor, where the owner's nephew comes in on the weekends to kind of be the cybersecurity guy for the company. But it's easy sometimes for us to talk up here about these issues, but how can you really reach out into that space and identify all the people that I think you need to reach to drive this issue forward?
Sure. I think now in the last several months coming out of our previous COVID situation, there's a lot more engagement in the field. So there's so many more events that are happening, and critical infrastructure is a big term, but there are events very specifically targeted utility and smart grids, as you kind of mentioned, things very specific in healthcare, like the HIMSS conference that's coming up. So going and meeting people where they are in terms of these very targeted events, and the ecosystem side of things. So it's the companies that operate there, it's the technology partners that are providing services there, it's the integration companies that are augmenting the staff so that the nephew or other members may or may not have to be part of that staff, short or long term. So meeting them where they are, talking about what's coming, being open about that, and having that ongoing dialogue, I think, is critical, and we're seeing some good progress there.
Got it. And we started out this conversation talking about 5G technology, how agencies are really moving forward with deployments and pilots. Any closing thoughts just on the future of that, the future of deploying 5G securely as that continues to happen and become kind of the basis for a lot of technology deployments?
Sure, absolutely. So 5G, we're expecting to see over 15 billion devices in 5G coming onto the network in the next 3 years. So it's absolutely something that we're seeing from a transformation perspective. It's something we've got to be hands-on in the early days from a security perspective. So 5G has very different protocols than 3G and 4G had. So in the case of Palo Alto Networks, what we're focused on is being able to help agencies see this traffic from an unencrypted perspective, and then encrypted back, so SSL decryption, things of that sort. So leveraging the newest technology that's available specific for 5G is one. And then, even closing the loop from our earlier points about the end-to-end visibility, risk assessment, the inline threat prevention, because 5G is so new to us that we've got to be able to block attacks even if we've never seen them before, and being able to leverage ML and AI technology to do just that. And then that ongoing responsibility of just policy enforcement, recommendations from ecosystems, and working closely with the network operators of 5G so that they're inherently protecting our 5G users.
All right, a lot to think about there. Again, I'd like to thank today's guest, Robert Williams, the Vice President for Product Go-to-Market for Emerging Network Security Solutions at Palo Alto Networks. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot, Justin.
You got it. I'm your moderator, Justin Doubleday, and you're listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Palo Alto Networks.